Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I come from Australia. I speak a funny form of English, so if you don't understand me, please just wave your arms. But my company, Truscott Crisis Leaders, we operate in a space where there's human error, mechanical failure, acts of God, and often third-party intervention. We're a management consultancy where risk plans in a whole variety of formats and people who are competent in the execution of those contingency plans are our products. I know gentlemen here from Can India. We've worked with Can India for many, many years, and I understand that they certainly appreciate what we do. Now, what does it mean to look at HSE loss prevention from both emergency response and business continuity perspectives? I note the linkage that Ben has drawn, and I want to build upon what he has already discussed. But ask yourself these questions. What's good practice? What's evolving best practice when HSE is impacted by multiple operational risks? We're faced by climate change, we're faced by chronic weather impacts all over the world, we're faced by cyber threats, we've seen tilting of offshore rigs by cyber attacks. We've seen cyber attacks threaten the unloading of ships in ports. The world continues to be bedeviled by the threat of pandemic. And of course, every day we have simple threats like loss of electrical power. There is a plethora of international standards and other national regulations and many, many good practice notes by many organisations on loss prevention, on emergency response, on incident management, on business continuity management. But what are the linkages, if any, apart from the comments that Ben has already made? There are also several evolving standards. And if you're not aware, the British Cabinet Office have actually put out a standard on crisis management. I was highly surprised that any organisation would dare do it. Such are the differing opinions on what crisis management means across different sectors, public and private organisations. But the British Standards Office has also recently put out a standard on resilience. And this is really what I want to talk about in my presentation. And of course, in addition to all these standards, and I know you're all familiar with many of these already, generally, most organisations these days take on an all hazards, all risks approach, indeed an all threats approach as well. Indeed, most regulators now mandate an all hazards, all risk, all threats approach to not only HSE, but also to emergency response and also to business continuity management. And of course, even those organisations that self-regulate, that are not bound by government regulation, often still choose to adopt that all hazards, all risk, all threats approach. Now please study this bell curve for me, this continuum. The language there will hopefully mean something to you. It's been our experience that HSE line management accountability seems to pick up business continuity management as well. It's really a bit of a default in most organisations. Certainly in the resource and manufacturing sectors where we do a lot of work, that seems to be the pattern. HSE just picks it up. You know? It's just part of the things that HSE does. It's also seen as a continuum between incident or emergency management in many sectors. However, there is really no obvious link or direct linkage between HSE and business continuity management. Business continuity management is a core operations function. Business continuity management is a core IT function. And unlike the natural synergy between HSE and emergency response, there is no natural synergy between HSE and business continuity management. Now, sure, response and recovery go hand in hand. We know that, you know. As the response tapers off, the recovery kicks in. But, you know, HSE risk is only but one risk. And again, Ben appropriately talked about the more proper use of enterprise risk management to describe that much wider risk that bedevils a business. HSE risk is only but one of the spectrum of enterprise-wide risks. And indeed, most HSE risks are operational in nature. They're not governance in nature, although, of course, some HSE risks can also be governance in nature. Now, please have a look at this. Now, you'll recognise all of these risks. There's nothing new there up on that slide. But which of those are actually HSE risks? Which of those are you prepared to put your hand up and say, well, I'll take responsibility for that risk? Which of those relate to emergency response? And again, are you going to put your hand up and take responsibility for those which relate to emergency response? Which of those are pure business continuity risks? And again, if you're after more work, you've got to put your hand up and take responsibility for them as well. But what we see up there is the reality of the modern world. That's what bedevils business on a daily basis. Now have a look at these. This is what's happened. Now, we're not here to talk about senior people behaving inappropriately or mismanagement, but that's the reality. That's what happens around us all the time. Which of these are HSE risks? Which of these relate to business continuity management? Now, there's about 3 to 4 publicly listed companies fail in Australia every year. They go out of business. 9 to 10 companies, publicly listed companies, fail every year in America. They go out of business. But the reality is just about every one of them comes from executive mismanagement. They don't come from any HSE risk. They don't come from emergency response. Very few of them come from business continuity management. So is it too wide a gap to bridge the link between HSE and business continuity management? Albeit Ben has put up a fairly compelling argument. What do we think? Could I invite each table just to have a 1-minute debate, please, just on your own table? Is it too wide a gap? Is the topic we're talking about just a noble idea but impossible to achieve? Please have a debate amongst yourselves just for 1 minute, please. Are we goofing off? Are we in outer space here? Looks good on paper, but practicality? Will it work? Okay, well, I'll get you talking a bit more in a minute, but have a look at this. This is the future. Some might say, well, it's actually happening now. It's not so much the future. This is what worries business all over the world at the moment. Now you'll recognise those. Some of the language up there might be a little quaint. You know, we wait and see the impact of oil price. If oil remains at $40 a barrel for 8 years, Is that going to become a HSE risk? They reckon Saudi Arabia can last 8 years at $40 a barrel. We wait and see where cyber attacks can go in a connected world. This is the phase 2 of social media. This is crowdsourcing and precinct grids, where people at the event know more than police or emergency services. We wait and see what happens with Facebook. Facebook has now got penetration in 50% of the world. It's half the world. There are now 5 billion people with mobile phones. So, with these risks facing business on a daily basis, again, are we trying to draw too much of a bridge between HSE and business continuity management? Or are the disciplines just so completely different? Just leave them alone as they are. Where are we? Okay. Now, the reality is that academics, some consultants, and some standards organisations are actually trying to make the linkage. And that's what this document does. It's called British Standard 65,000. Some of you may be aware of it. It's very new. It's only been on the streets about maybe a month at the most. It was issued very late last year. It plans to evolve into an ISO in 2017, so we've got a few years to go. Ultimately, it's going to be called ISO 22316, okay? But it's a couple of years away from being under that label. But the British Standards Organisation is making the case to link all line management disciplines under the heading of what's called resilience. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership going into this combination approach at the moment. Some saying that the blending of all management disciplines is called resilience. Some people talk about it as the sweet spot on a golf club. You hit the ball in the right spot, well, you're on the money. So, let me talk just a little bit more about this resilience and the linkage that this document is trying to make between all disciplines, not just HSE, emergency response and business continuity management, but operational management, the complete suite of line management. Now, in many respects, this is what this conference theme is all about. When I read in the conference documents where there's an argument that we're moving away from HSE management systems to an operational excellence management system. So it's trying to embrace all line management disciplines together. Now, whether this happens or not, we'll wait and see. Others say that the best way to simply understand resilience is the ability to withstand business shock. All those things that happen almost every day of the week. People argue that you become resilient, you toughen your business if you put people first in your business model. Not safety first, people first as part of your business model. They argue that you become tough in your organisation if you have diversity. Instead of one head office, you have 2 head offices. Instead of 1 tank farm, you have 2 tank farms. And instead of having 1 export terminal, you have 3 export terminals, and so on. And it's said that you become tough and resilient in your business if you coordinate actively upstream and downstream, with your suppliers, all those organisations that you're dependent upon and organisations that depend upon you. So from that perspective, resilience is just really, it's a state of mind as much as documentation. So that's why when we try and explain it to people, we use the formula, and that is resilience is a function of crisis and emergency management plus business continuity management, and of course all underpinned by risk management. And on top of that again, it all depends on the degree of application, because we know we can do this in a compliance-based paperwork way, or we can do it 110%. Now, could I just ask with a show of hands, who's heard of this resilience concept before, and indeed who's heard of this standard that's just come out? Anyone? Okay, a couple. Okay, or quite a few, maybe about a third of the group. I'm not trying to sell this standard, by the way, and this is just thought leadership at the moment, and whether people actually sign up to this or not, we're yet to see. Now, the combination of emergency plans, business continuity plans, underpinned by risk registers, underpinned by the business impact analysis, the BIA, now constitute the components of what people are increasingly calling a business resilience framework. You'll see that terminology used in a lot of organisations. Having all those component bits is starting to be seen as good practice. The reality is that the processes for emergency response, crisis management, the processes for business continuity management, of course they share a lot in common, but the reality is that each is recognised and handled as a standalone process within the framework. So frameworks seek to integrate corporate level, whole of business, crisis and business continuity plans, and provide for the management of enterprise-wide risk, as Ben talked about. The framework and the content of each of these supporting plans is developed using an array of international and national standards. Indeed, on your tables, you'll see some yellow page handouts where I've listed some international standards. You're able to probably add to that list and identify lots of other standards from the country or from the sector in which you operate. I'm not in any way attempting to make that listing comprehensive. Although if you are interested in comprehensive listing of standards, the Business Continuity Institute does put out an annual summary of all standards in all countries. It's very comprehensive and worth looking at if you've never seen it before. Now what I'm going to do is refer to an annex in this document, and again on the handout that you have on the table you'll see an extract of the standard, and I want to ask you a lot of questions. I actually want to use your experience, your own personal experience, as well as that from the organisation that you represent, to see whether it is truly practical to try and put all line management disciplines together into one concept known as resilience? Or is it just such an academic notion, but the practicalities are impossible on the ground? And in particular, I want to ask, can we actually link HSE, emergency response, be it an element of HSE, be it an element of IT, be it an element of many other things as well? What about this? Now, many of the questions that have been asked here, they've been asked before. It's not like they're new questions. But what this document is trying to do is to bring all line management disciplines together. So when this audit is done, it's not just done of HSE, it's done of operations, it's done of procurement, it's done of logistics, it's done of the leadership. Everyone has to answer this question for the organisation to be assessed as resilient. What about these? Perhaps a little bit more familiar. Nothing particularly new up there. What about this? Now, a lot of the responses to this can be quite subjective, of course. One person will assess it this way because their experience will lead them to assess it that way. Somebody else will have an entirely different view. But for all the questions that I've just put up there, the standard requires you to identify whether you're immature, basic, managed, established, predictable or optimising. Will this standard become the basis for operational excellence that this conference seems to put up as an idea? Well, no, I'm a crisis practitioner, so I've got my own view on this, clearly. No matter how resilient you are, no matter how tough your business might be, clearly, if you wish to lead in business, at some stage you need to function in a non-business as usual environment. And somehow you've got to try and capitalise or make the best of that particularly terrible situation. We know human error, acts of God, mechanical failure, third-party intervention. We know emergencies and business outages are going to continue to occur. So planning to manage these situations is key to corporate survival. Some organisations now are seeking to build in notions of resilience into their systems, but from my way of thinking, I might be proven wrong, but from what I see at the moment, to me resilience is more of just a mental and physical disposition. It's not necessarily a system that's going to try and link all management disciplines successfully. I'd appreciate any opportunity to take questions you might have at the end.